spoiled teen mocked the old taxi driver. Seconds later, he showed her a photo from her father's funeral. "Keep your money, kid. I'm not your servant." The old man's voice cut through the noisy New York street like a blade. The teen girl blinked, shocked. Her hand froze midair, holding out a crumpled $5 bill. "Excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with attitude. The old taxi driver turned to her, his dark skin glistening under the city lights, his eyes tired but fierce. "You heard me. Take your money. You already paid the fare. I don't need your pity." People outside the airport turned their heads. The girl, Chloe, 17, rich, spoiled, and always loud, wasn't used to anyone talking back, especially not a cab driver. "Wow," she scoffed. "Do you talk to all your customers like that? No wonder you're still driving this junkyard car." The man's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. He said nothing. "Whatever," Chloe muttered, flipping her hair and grabbing her pink designer bag. "My dad's waiting. He tips people who actually deserve it." She slammed the door and walked away. But as she strutted toward the shining black Mercedes waiting at the curb, she didn't notice the driver's hands trembling on the steering wheel, or the small folded photo sitting by the meter, a photo of a young soldier smiling beside a man in uniform. Her father. Inside the Mercedes, her dad looked up from his phone. "Chloe, you made it. What took so long?" "Ugh, that driver," she said, rolling her eyes. "Old, rude, smells like gasoline. Should have retired a century ago." Her father froze. "Old black man? Drives a yellow cab with a flag keychain?" "Yeah, why?" He didn't answer. He just stared out the window, his jaw tight, his eyes glassy. "Dad?" Chloe asked, frowning. "What's wrong?" He whispered, almost to himself. "I think you just met someone who saved my life." Chloe laughed. "What are you talking about?" Her father turned slowly to face her, his voice low and trembling. "That man, that driver, he's the reason I ever came home from Afghanistan." Chloe's smile faded. She looked out the window, where the taxi was still parked at the curb, headlights dim. The driver staring down at a photo in his hand, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel proud of who she was. She felt small. The next morning, Chloe couldn't stop thinking about that man. His voice, his eyes, the way her father's face had changed the moment he heard his name. "Dad," she said over breakfast, "you said that cab driver saved your life. What did you mean?" Her father, Colonel Mark Benson, stirred his coffee slowly. He looked tired, older than she remembered. "Chloe, there are things about my time overseas I never told you." "Like what?" she asked. He took a deep breath. "When I was in Afghanistan, our unit was ambushed. Everyone scattered. I was hit. I would have died there if a local driver hadn't risked his life to pull me out. He drove me 20 miles through enemy fire to the nearest camp." Chloe blinked. "And that was him?" "The cab driver." Mark nodded. "His name's Samuel Gray. He was an American volunteer. When we came home, he couldn't get work because of his age and injury. Last I heard, he started driving taxis in New York." Chloe's stomach sank. The man she'd mocked was a hero. Her father's hero. She couldn't sit still. The memory of his hurt eyes burned in her mind. By noon, she was standing back at JFK Airport scanning the taxi lane. Dozens of yellow cars, drivers shouting, engines roaring, but not him. She asked one driver, "Do you know Samuel Gray?" The man nodded slowly. "Old guy? Quiet? Drives nights mostly. Check the diner on 8th and Madison. He always stops there for lunch." "Thanks," she said, already running. The diner smelled like coffee and rain. Chloe pushed through the door, her heart pounding. There he was, sitting alone in a booth by the window, his worn hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. The same flag keychain dangled from his pocket. She walked up slowly. "Mr. Gray?" He looked up, his eyes wary. "You again," he said quietly. "What do you want?" "Another insult?" Chloe's throat tightened. "No, I came to apologize." He said nothing, just watched her carefully. She sat across from him, nervous. "I didn't know who you were. My father—" He cut her off. "Your father?" "Colonel Mark Benson," she said quickly. "He told me you saved his life. Samuel froze, his hand trembling slightly. Then, very slowly, he reached into his wallet and pulled out that same folded photo she'd seen in the taxi. He slid it across the table. In the picture, a young soldier stood grinning, one arm around a man in dusty clothes and a U.S. flag patch on his vest. Her father. And him. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "That's him." Samuel nodded. "Yeah, your dad was a good man, brave. I didn't think he'd even remember me." "He does," Chloe whispered. "He never forgot." Samuel's gaze softened. "Then maybe I didn't waste my life after all." She bit her lip, guilt rising in her chest. "Mr. Gray, I said terrible things to you yesterday. He held up a hand. "Child, I've been called worse." But hearing it from a soldier's daughter, that cut deep. Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry." He sighed, then smiled faintly. "Apology accepted. But remember something, young lady. You never know who someone was before life made them invisible." Chloe nodded, unable to speak. She wiped her tears and whispered, "Would you come home with me? My dad wants to see you." Samuel looked out the window, the city lights reflecting in his tired eyes. "I don't think I belong in that kind of house anymore." "You belong more than anyone," she said softly. And in that moment, for the first time in years, the old driver smiled, a smile full of pain, pride, and a quiet grace. The sun was setting by the time Chloe's father stepped out onto the porch. He stood stiff and straight, the way soldiers do even after they've been home for years. But his eyes were full of something Chloe hadn't seen before. Fear and hope mixed together. A yellow cab pulled up to the driveway. The door opened slowly. Samuel Gray stepped out, his hands in his jacket pockets, his hat pulled low. The old flag keychain jingled softly against his leg. Mark took a step forward, his voice barely a whisper. "Sam," the old driver smiled faintly. "Still recognize me, Colonel?" For a long second, neither man moved. Then Mark crossed the distance between them and pulled Samuel into a tight, wordless hug. The sound of it, the air catching in both their chests, made Chloe's throat ache. Inside the house, the mood was quiet, heavy with memories. Samuel's eyes wandered over the photos on the walls. Mark in uniform, medals, family holidays. He smiled sadly. "You made it home, huh?" Mark nodded. "Because of you." Samuel shook his head. "Because of faith. You prayed. I just drove." They sat at the kitchen table. Chloe brought them coffee, her hands trembling slightly. Mark looked at her, then at Samuel. "She told me how she acted at the airport." "I'm sorry for that." Samuel waved a hand. "Kids grow. I was one once, too." Then he looked at Chloe, his voice gentle. "You came back, didn't you?" "That says enough." Chloe smiled weakly, tears in her eyes. Mark leaned back in his chair, staring into his cup. "Sam, you disappeared after the war. I tried to find you." Samuel chuckled softly. "Didn't want to be found. Got hurt, couldn't do much anymore. Started driving cabs to keep busy." He paused, eyes glinting. "Funny thing, though, driving these streets. I see more pain here than I ever did in a war zone." Mark nodded slowly. "You were always wiser than you looked," Samuel smiled. "And you were always dumber than you thought." They both laughed, the tension cracking just enough to breathe again. Then Samuel grew quiet. "Colonel," he said softly, "you remember that last day? The convoy attack?" Mark's smile faded. "I never forgot it. I never told you." Samuel's voice trembled. "Your unit wasn't supposed to make it. Command said pull out. I went back anyway. I thought maybe one man's life was worth disobeying for." Mark's eyes filled with tears. "You disobeyed orders?" "For me," Samuel nodded slowly. "Sometimes right and wrong ain't written in orders, son." The room went silent. Even Chloe didn't breathe. Then Mark reached across the table and gripped Samuel's hand. "You didn't just save my life, Sam. You saved every moment I had with my daughter. Every birthday, every Christmas, everything." Samuel blinked hard, looking down. "Then maybe it was worth the years I lost." Chloe's lip trembled. "You didn't lose them," she said softly. "You just gave them to us." For the first time, Samuel couldn't hide the tear that slipped down his cheek. He smiled through it and whispered, "You're your father's daughter after all." The clock ticked softly in the background. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. Mark stood, walked to the mantel and took down a framed medal, the Silver Star. He placed it in front of Samuel. "This was supposed to be yours," he said quietly. "You earned it." "I just wore it." Samuel stared at it, then at his old friend. "I don't need medals, Mark. I just needed this moment." But Mark shook his head. "No. This time, you take it home." And as Samuel's old hands closed around that shining piece of metal, the room seemed to glow with something deeper than forgiveness. Something holy. News traveled fast in the neighborhood. Within a week, people started whispering about the war hero taxi driver who'd saved a colonel's life. It started as a local article online, then spread to TV. The headline read, "Decorated soldier honors the man who saved him." "You earned this," he said, voice breaking. "You risked everything for a stranger." Samuel smiled faintly. He wasn't a stranger, just a man who needed saving. The crowd clapped softly, but Chloe wasn't watching them. She was watching him, the way he looked at her father, not with pride, but with peace. After the reporters left, Samuel sighed. "Never thought I'd be on the news for something I did right." Chloe laughed through tears. "Maybe the world finally noticed." Samuel turned to her. "Kid, the world notices too late most times. But that doesn't mean you stop doing right." Those words hit her harder than any lecture she'd ever had. The next morning, Chloe walked into her private high school differently. No designer bag, no sunglasses, just her. When her friends started laughing about the old cabbie story trending online, she stopped them cold. "That old cabbie saved my father's life," she said firmly. "He's more of a hero than any of us will ever be." The room went silent. That night, she posted a video online. Her sitting in her dad's study, holding the medal. "His name is Samuel Gray. He drove taxis when the world forgot his name. But my family won't forget, ever." The video exploded. Thousands of comments. Veterans wrote things like, "Thank you for seeing us." Others shared stories about people who quietly saved lives without ever being thanked. A week later, Samuel stood outside his taxi one last time. He ran his hand along the hood like saying goodbye to an old friend. When Mark and Chloe pulled up, he smiled. "Guess I'm finally retiring." Chloe grinned. "Good, because you've got a new job." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really?" She nodded toward the large building down the block, a community center with a fresh banner. "The Samuel Gray Center for Veterans." Mark smiled. "We built it in your name, Sam. A place where people like you can rest, get help, and be remembered." Samuel's eyes glistened. "You didn't have to." "We wanted to," Chloe interrupted softly. "Because heroes don't drive taxis forever." Samuel stood there looking at the sign. His lips trembled. "I never wanted fame," he whispered. "Just to matter to someone again." Mark put a hand on his shoulder. "You already did, Sam. You mattered the day you refused to leave me behind." Chloe smiled, tears running freely now. "And you matter today because you changed who I am." Samuel chuckled softly. "Then I guess I did my job right." The three of them stood in front of the center as the sun dipped behind the skyline. For a long, beautiful moment, they said nothing. Because sometimes silence says everything. The day after the center's grand opening, the city felt different to Samuel. Maybe it was the light. Maybe it was peace. For the first time in years, he wasn't driving people around for survival. He was driving for goodbye. He polished his old yellow taxi one last time, the same one that had carried soldiers, tourists, broken hearts, and second chances. It wasn't just metal to him. It was memory on 4 wheels. Chloe ran outside when she heard the engine start. "Mr. Gray," she called out. "Where are you going?" Samuel smiled gently through the window. "Just one more ride, sweetheart. One last lap around this city that raised me and broke me." She frowned. "You don't have to go alone." He chuckled softly. "Some roads, you walk alone so you can remember who walked with you." Her eyes shimmered. "Then at least promise you'll come back?" He nodded once. "You'll see me soon enough." The taxi rolled through Manhattan as the sunset painted the sky orange and gold. He passed the park where he used to eat lunch between rides, the hospital that still sent bills he couldn't pay, the diner on 8th where he met Chloe again. Every corner told a story. Every red light felt like a heartbeat slowing down. He stopped at a traffic light near Times Square and saw a billboard glowing above the crowd. The Samuel Gray Center for Veterans, honoring those who served. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. Never thought I'd see my name up there. A stranger knocked on his window. "Hey, old man," the guy said, smiling. "You're that hero from the news, ain't you?" Samuel smiled, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Nah, just a man who kept driving." The light turned green, and the taxi moved again. Slow, steady, peaceful. Hours later, he parked by the Hudson River. The city lights shimmered on the water like stars had fallen from the sky. He took out the small photo from his wallet, the one of him and Mark back in Afghanistan, and placed it on the dashboard. Then he whispered, "We made it home, brother." He leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, and smiled. For the first time in years, his hands didn't tremble. His heart didn't ache. You're rested. The next morning, a jogger found the yellow cab parked peacefully by the river. The engine was off. The man inside looked like he was sleeping, a gentle smile on his face, one hand still holding the photo. The radio played softly, an old gospel song about coming home. When Chloe and her father got the call, they rushed to the scene. Chloe opened the taxi door with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. Her father whispered, "He's gone home." On the passenger seat lay a folded note with her name written in neat, careful handwriting. "Dear Chloe, don't cry for me. My road just reached its stop. You gave an old man something to believe in again. Kindness, family, purpose. Keep driving for me. Don't ever let pride make you forget where you came from. When you see a yellow taxi, smile. I'll be around." Sam Chloe pressed the note to her heart and sobbed. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "He didn't die alone, honey. He died knowing he was loved." The day of Samuel Gray's funeral, New York City stood still. For a man who'd once been invisible, the whole world seemed to see him now. Veterans from across the country came in uniform, lining the streets outside the church. Taxi drivers parked in long rows, yellow cars stretching for blocks, their hazard lights blinking like candles of respect. The air was heavy, but it wasn't just grief. It was gratitude. Inside the small Brooklyn church, sunlight poured through the stained glass windows. The coffin stood near the altar, covered not with flowers but with a folded American flag and a single taxi driver's cap. Chloe sat in the front row beside her father. She held Samuel's final letter in her hands, the one that ended with the words, "When you see a yellow taxi, smile. I'll be around." Mark leaned forward and whispered, "He saved my life twice, once in war and once here at home." She looked at him through tears. "What do you mean?" Her father smiled softly. "After I came home, I forgot how to live. He reminded me what it means to be human again." When it was time to speak, Chloe walked slowly to the front of the church. She wasn't wearing makeup or fancy clothes, just a simple white dress. She unfolded a small piece of paper but didn't look at it. "I didn't know Mr. Gray long," she began, her voice trembling. "But I think I learned more from him in 2 weeks than in 17 years of my life." She paused, looking around the room filled with veterans, drivers, and strangers. "I used to think heroes were the ones in movies. Rich, powerful, loud. But real heroes don't look like that. Sometimes they wear dusty jackets and drive you through traffic. Sometimes they save your life without ever asking for thanks." Her voice cracked. "He saved my dad's life, and he saved mine, from becoming someone I wouldn't be proud of." Tears rolled down her cheeks. She looked at the casket and whispered, "I hope you know, Mr. Gray, you mattered." The church went silent until one by one people began to stand. Veterans saluted. Taxi drivers removed their hats. Even strangers wept quietly in the pews. After the service, the city organized something no one expected. At sunset, every yellow taxi in New York lined up on Fifth Avenue, engines off, lights flashing, horns silent. For 1 full minute, the city that never stopped for Samuel Gray. A reporter filmed it live. The headline that night read, "New York's Quietest Minute," honoring the taxi driver who drove a nation's heart. Back at the foundation, Mark and Chloe built a new garden behind the Veterans Center. Right in the middle stood a bronze statue, Samuel leaning against his cab, smiling, a hand resting on a folded photo. At the bottom, the plaque read, "He drove more than cars. He drove souls home." Every day, someone left a single white rose by the statue. Chloe always suspected it was one of the other drivers, until one morning she saw her father standing there alone, hand pressed to the plaque, whispering, "Thank you, brother." That night Chloe sat by her window, watching taxis move under the streetlights below, and when one passed, its headlights reflecting off her tears, she smiled softly and whispered, "I see you, Mr. Gray," because somehow, in the rhythm of the city and the hum of every engine, it felt like he was still driving, still carrying lost souls toward home. Months passed, but the story of Samuel Gray didn't fade. It became something bigger, something alive. Chloe, now 18, stood in front of a crowd of students at her school. What started as one high school campaign turned into a city-wide movement. Taxi companies partnered to provide free rides for veterans and the elderly. Students volunteered every weekend, handing out warm meals and thank you notes to drivers. Every note ended with the same words. "Because of you, we got home." News stations picked up the story again, calling Chloe the teen who turned a stranger's kindness into a city's heart. But she didn't do it for headlines. She did it because she could still hear Samuel's voice in her head. "Keep driving for me." One afternoon, Chloe visited the Veterans Center. The garden was in full bloom, white roses shining in the sunlight. She sat by Samuel's statue and smiled. "Hey, Mr. Gray," she whispered. "We did it. You're still driving." She opened her backpack and pulled out a small yellow taxi toy, the same kind he used to drive. "I carry this every day," she said, placing it beside the flowers. "Reminds me to stay humble and to keep moving forward." A gentle wind brushed her hair. For a second, it felt like someone was standing beside her. She didn't see anyone, but she smiled anyway. That evening, Chloe's father found her in the garage. She was polishing an old photo frame, the one of him and Samuel. "You've grown up," he said softly. She smiled. "He'd say I just finally started seeing." Mark nodded. "He'd be proud of you, Chloe. So am I." She looked at him, eyes wet but bright. "You know, Dad, sometimes I think heroes don't die. They just leave the steering wheel for someone else." He smiled. "Then keep driving, kid," she laughed through her tears. "I will." Outside, the city glowed, taxis moving like fireflies through the streets. And as Chloe looked out her window, she whispered into the night, "I see you, Mr. Gray." And somewhere in the hum of the engines and the rhythm of the lights, it almost felt like the city whispered back, "Keep driving, kid. You're doing just fine." 10 years later, the city had changed, and so had Chloe. No longer a teenager, she now stood at the grand opening of a brand new building in downtown Manhattan, a sleek glass structure with gold letters shining across the front. The Road Home Foundation, in honor of Samuel Gray. Cameras flashed, but Chloe didn't look at them. She looked at the statue near the entrance. Samuel leaning against his cab, that same gentle smile forever frozen in bronze. She smiled back. The mayor handed her the microphone. "Miss Benson, you've done something remarkable. You turned one man's story into hope for thousands. What made you start all this?" Chloe took a deep breath. Her voice was calm but full of emotion. "It started with a ride I didn't deserve," she said, "and a man I didn't respect, until I found out he was the reason my father was alive." The crowd went silent. She continued, "Samuel Gray taught me that heroes don't always wear uniforms or make headlines. Sometimes they just show up. They keep driving when the world forgets them. They keep loving when nobody's looking. Her voice trembled. Mr. Gray didn't have much, but he gave everything. And now, his kindness drives farther than he ever did. After the ceremony, she walked quietly to the garden behind the building. The same white roses bloomed there just like the ones at the old center. She knelt beside Samuel's photo. Older now, framed in glass, the light catching the metal beside it. "Hey, Mr. Gray," she whispered. "We did it. You've got centers all across the country now. We help veterans, drivers, families. Thousands of people are home again because of you." A tear slipped down her cheek. I wish you could see it. Then she looked up, and there, parked by the curb, was a yellow taxi. Old, worn out, the kind you barely saw anymore. The driver inside smiled, waved once, and drove off slowly into the evening light. Chloe blinked. It couldn't be. But something in her heart whispered, "It's him." She smiled through tears. "Still driving, huh?" That night, she returned home to her father's house. On the piano, where Samuel's photo once sat, she placed the small gold keychain from his old cab, the one the police had given her years ago. Her father came into the room quietly. "You okay, kid?" She nodded. "Yeah, just thinking," he smiled. "About Sam?" "Always." She looked out the window at the city lights. "You know, Dad, I used to think home was a place, but now I think it's people. The ones who find you when you're lost." He smiled softly. "You learned well." The next morning, Chloe got into a taxi to head to the airport for a charity event. The driver, a young man, looked back and said, "Where to, ma'am?" She smiled. "Wherever people need help getting home," he laughed. "That's a nice answer." She looked at the rearview mirror, and for a second, she thought she saw Samuel's eyes smiling back at her through the glass. Her heart swelled with peace. As the taxi rolled down the highway, the city lights shimmered behind her, and for one quiet, golden moment, she heard his voice again, "Keep driving, kid. You're doing just fine." She closed her eyes, smiling as the wind rushed through the open window. The hum of the engine felt like a heartbeat, the same rhythm Samuel Gray once drove to, because some stories don't end. They just keep going, mile after mile, heart after heart, until every lost soul finds their way home. The end.